Before the name became a badge, before it appeared on recruiting posters, display teams, and regimental memory, it began in the cold mud of Tunisia. German soldiers facing the British 1st Parachute Brigade in North Africa saw men who did not quite look like ordinary infantry. Their uniforms were stained by the reddish earth. Their parachute smocks hung strangely from their bodies, and in the poor light of winter fighting they seemed to move with a harsh, unsettling energy. The nickname that emerged from those encounters was simple, vivid, and not meant as a compliment. They called them the Red Devils. To understand why that name mattered, it is necessary to go back to 1940, when Britain had just watched German airborne forces shock Europe with operations in the Low Countries and Crete. Winston Churchill did not want Britain merely to admire this new kind of warfare from a distance. He wanted Britain to build its own airborne arm. What followed was not the creation of another ordinary infantry regiment, but a force selected, trained, and hardened for a battlefield where a man might land separated from his officer, his section, and even his objective, and still be expected to fight. The National Army Museum describes the early paratrooper ideal in exactly those terms. Resilient, disciplined, versatile, aggressive in battle, and self-reliant. Their first proof came before Tunisia, on the night of 27 to February 28, 1942, at Berniville on the French coast. Men of C Company, 2nd Parachute Battalion, commanded by Major John Frost, were dropped near a German Würzburg radar site. Their task was to seize critical radar components and escape by sea. The raid succeeded, and it gave the new British airborne force its first real claim to usefulness. Not as theory, not as imitation of the Germans, but as a practical weapon of war. But Berniville was a raid. Tunisia was different. In North Africa, the paratroopers were no longer a small force striking one target in the night. They were thrown into a hard campaign where parachute troops often had to fight as ordinary infantry in rough terrain, against experienced German and Italian formations, in weather and ground conditions that turned every movement into effort. It was there, in those bitter winter battles, that the legend began to form. The North African campaign did not give the British paratroopers the clean, controlled battlefield that planners imagined when they spoke about airborne warfare in Britain. It gave them scattered landings, uncertain intelligence, long marches, and sudden contact with an enemy already experienced in mobile desert fighting. On November 12, 1942, the 3rd Parachute Battalion jumped onto the airfield at Beaune and seized it just before German parachute troops could do the same. For days later, the 1st Parachute Battalion dropped near Béja, roughly 90 miles from Tunis, to secure a key road junction and link with the advancing British First Army. These were not glamorous operations in the public imagination, but to the Germans they revealed something important. The British airborne arm was no longer experimental. It was now appearing where it was not expected and interfering with German movement before the main Allied force could arrive. Then came Udna. On November 29, 1942, the 2nd Parachute Battalion under Lieutenant Colonel John Frost was dropped to attack aircraft at Udna, only to find the airfield abandoned. The larger Allied advance had been halted by unexpectedly strong Axis resistance, leaving Frost's battalion isolated around 50 miles behind enemy lines. What followed was not the neat raid of Berniville, but a fighting withdrawal over 2 days, with the battalion losing about 16 officers and 250 men before reaching Allied lines. The operation was costly, but it also burned a lesson into both sides. British paratroopers could be badly placed, undersupplied, and nearly surrounded, yet still refused to dissolve into prisoners. That refusal mattered. German commanders were used to assessing airborne troops as shock forces. Dangerous at the moment of landing, vulnerable once isolated. But in Tunisia, the British paratroopers complicated that assumption. They were not merely falling onto objectives. They were marching, digging in, counterattacking, and surviving as hard infantry in country where supply, weather, and terrain punished every mistake. By early 1943, as winter settled into the Tunisian hills, the 1st Parachute Brigade was increasingly used in the infantry role. In the Tamara Valley in March, where German and Italian forces threatened to break out along the coastal road, the brigade held rough ground under heavy pressure from attacks supported by artillery and aircraft. By the campaign's end, it had conducted 3 major airborne operations, fought in more battles than any other formation in the First Army, captured 3,500 prisoners, and suffered 1,700 casualties. The nickname would not come from one dramatic jump alone. It came from the accumulation of nights, withdrawals, patrols, and stubborn stands that forced German soldiers to remember them. The name Red Devils was powerful because it captured two things at once: appearance and behavior. The appearance came first. The 1st Parachute Brigade had been issued its distinctive maroon berets shortly before leaving for North Africa, and the red dust of Tunisia clung to their kit after jumps, patrols, and marches. To German eyes, these were not ordinary khaki figures moving across the hills. They were hard, reddish shapes appearing suddenly in country where the enemy thought distance and terrain would protect him. Paradata records that at the end of the campaign, General Alexander congratulated the brigade after learning that German troops had given them the name Rotteufeln, or Red Devils. General Browning, founder of British Airborne Forces, understood the meaning immediately. Distinctions given by the enemy, he noted, were rarely won in battle except by the finest fighting troops. But the deeper reason was not the beret or the dust. It was the way these men fought when the conditions were against them. British airborne doctrine expected a paratrooper to be separated from support. He might land without heavy weapons. He might lose radio contact. He might be surrounded before dawn. In an ordinary formation, those conditions could paralyze command. In a parachute battalion, they were almost part of the design. The National Army Museum describes the parachute regiment soldiers as trained to be resilient, disciplined, versatile, aggressive in battle, and self-reliant, and those qualities were not slogans in Tunisia. They were survival requirements. That is why German respect hardened into a nickname. The British paratrooper did not need the battlefield to be neat. He had already been trained to operate inside confusion. In Tunisia, when orders were delayed, when objectives changed, when relief columns failed to arrive on time, small groups kept moving, kept holding, and kept attacking. To German soldiers, this created the impression of a force that did not behave according to normal infantry expectations. They could be cut off, yet still remain dangerous. They could be outnumbered, yet still force the enemy to move carefully. And when the brigade left North Africa, the name went with them. It was no longer only a German description from one campaign. It had become a warning label. In Sicily, at Primosole Bridge, the Red Devils would be tested again, this time against German airborne troops who understood parachute warfare as well as anyone in Europe. Primosole Bridge was the kind of objective airborne planners wanted and feared at the same time. It was a single crossing over the Samito River, south of Catania, and it controlled the route by which the British Eighth Army hoped to push north along the eastern side of Sicily. If the bridge was destroyed, the advance would slow. If it was captured intact, the road toward the Catania plain remained open. On the night of July 13, 1943, Brigadier Gerald Lathbury's 1st Parachute Brigade took off from North Africa with 1,856 men, carried by 113 transport aircraft and 16 gliders. The plan was direct. Drop on both sides of the bridge, seize it before demolition charges could be fired, and hold until ground forces arrived. The execution was anything but direct. Aircraft were hit by enemy fire and, worse still, by friendly naval fire from ships already nervous after earlier air attacks. Crews became disoriented in the darkness. The drop scattered badly. Paradata records that only 12 officers and 283 airborne soldiers reached the brigade rendezvous points. Yet by dawn on July 14th, those few men had taken the bridge. That single fact explains why the Red Devils' reputation survived even when operations went wrong. They did not need the plan to remain perfect in order to make the enemy pay. But Primosole was not only a British airborne story. It became a rare duel between two parachute traditions. German Fallschirmjäger units were also moving into the area, and they were among the most respected soldiers in the German army. These were not second-line troops surprised by an unfamiliar method of war. They understood airborne combat because they had helped define it. That made the fighting around the bridge especially brutal. The British paratroopers were exhausted, scattered, short of ammunition, and without the full weight of their brigade behind them. The Germans, arriving with skill and discipline of their own, pressed hard from both sides of the river. For several days, the bridge changed from objective to battlefield. British paratroopers held, withdrew, counterattacked, and then fought in coordination with the advancing Durham light infantry and supporting armor. The final capture of the crossing was not a clean airborne triumph, but a combined arms struggle paid for in heavy casualties. And that was the point. The name Red Devils did not mean invincible. It meant that even when isolated, reduced, and forced back, they remained dangerous enough to demand the enemy's best troops, best attention, and best efforts. After Primosole, the Red Devils carried the weight of a reputation that was now larger than a brigade. The 1st Airborne Division landed as a division in Italy in 1943, but it was not used on D-Day. Instead, after months of cancelled operations, its next great test came in September 1944, when Operation Market Garden tried to seize a chain of bridges through the Netherlands and open a route across the Rhine. At Arnhem, around 10,000 men from Major General Roy Urquhart's 1st British Airborne Division and the 1st Polish Independent Parachute Brigade landed near the town. Their landing zones were about 7 miles from the bridge, and that distance mattered from the first hours. Only one battalion reached the bridge itself, while much of the remaining force was compressed into the Oosterbeek perimeter west of Arnhem. There, the old qualities that had created the name in Tunisia reappeared under more desperate conditions. The men at Arnhem were not facing scattered rear-area troops. They were opposed by German forces that included experienced armored formations refitting in the area. The British airborne plan had depended on speed, surprise, and relief by ground forces. When those assumptions failed, the battle became a test of endurance. Small groups held houses, crossroads, woods, and shrinking defensive lines with limited ammunition, limited communications, and no realistic hope of reinforcement arriving on schedule. The contrast was brutal. Airborne troops had been designed for sudden offensive action, but at Arnhem they became defenders of a pocket. The same independence that made them dangerous in Tunisia and Sicily now allowed isolated platoons and companies to keep functioning when the wider plan had broken apart. German soldiers had first called them Red Devils because they appeared suddenly and fought with unnatural stubbornness. At Arnhem, that name was confirmed not by victory, but by the cost of defeating them. By the time the survivors were withdrawn across the river, the 1st Airborne Division had been shattered. Paradata describes it as virtually wiped out during the fighting around Arnhem and Oosterbeek, and the division itself would be disbanded after the war in 1945. Yet the reputation did not disappear with the losses. If anything, Arnhem sealed the nickname into British military memory. It proved that Red Devils was not simply about a red beret or Tunisian dust. It described a type of soldier, self-reliant, aggressive, disciplined, and able to keep fighting when the plan, the radios, and the roads had failed. That is why German soldiers remembered them. Not because they were superhuman, and not because every airborne operation succeeded. British parachute operations were often costly, scattered, and imperfect. But the men who wore the maroon beret repeatedly showed the same pattern under pressure. They landed into confusion. They adapted faster than expected. They forced professional German troops to treat even small groups as serious threats. And from North Africa to Sicily to Arnhem, the name followed them because the enemy had given it weight. The Red Devils earned it the hard way, one drop zone, one bridge, one perimeter, and one impossible stand at a time. If you found this story valuable, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us for more forgotten battlefield histories from the Second World War.